I thought I was only driving back to bury a memory. But the second those two little girls looked up at me beside my ex-wife's grave, I felt my whole chest cave in. Because they didn't just know her smile. They had my eyes. The summer air felt heavy that afternoon, the kind that sticks to your skin and makes old memories harder to ignore. I stepped out of my black sedan in a navy suit that still smelled faintly like the city. Expensive cologne, office meetings, the life I'd spent years hiding inside. The cemetery was quiet except for the soft sound of leaves moving above me, and for a second, I almost turned around and left. 5 years had already passed. Part of me kept thinking maybe I had lost the right to come back here at all. I hadn't seen Claire since the divorce. After everything fell apart between us, I buried myself in work, flights, investors, endless meetings, anything loud enough to drown out what I felt when I thought about her. Then, a few weeks ago, an old college friend sent me a message saying she had passed away after being sick for months. That was how I found out. Not from family, not from friends. Just a message on my phone while sitting in another glass office pretending my life meant something. I missed the funeral. I told myself it was because of work, but deep down I knew the truth was uglier than that. I was afraid to stand in front of what I ruined. Still, the guilt kept sitting on my chest every night until I finally drove 3 hours back to the town where we used to live together, before ambition pulled me one way and pain pulled her the other. I kept telling myself I just wanted to say goodbye, nothing more. As I walked through the rows of graves, memories kept hitting me in pieces. The last time Claire and I had been in this cemetery, we were planting flowers for her mother's funeral. Back then, I still believed broken things could be fixed if you loved hard enough. I was wrong. Then I saw them, 2 little girls kneeling beside Claire's grave in matching red sweaters even though the heat was unbearable. One held a bunch of wildflowers. The other had a folded paper pressed tightly in her hand like she was scared the wind might steal it away. They looked so small sitting there beside that headstone that for a second I couldn't move. I almost walked away because it felt too private, but something about them pulled me closer. When they finally looked up at me, my stomach dropped so hard it physically hurt. Brown eyes. Same shape as mine. Same expression Claire used to make when she didn't trust someone yet. "Hi," I said quietly, my voice sounding unfamiliar even to me. "Are you here, visiting someone?" One of the girls nodded. "This is our mommy," she whispered softly. Her name was Claire Carter. I swear the world went silent after that. The other little girl looked at me carefully before saying, "Mommy talked about you sometimes." I felt my heartbeat slam against my ribs. My throat tightened so fast I could barely breathe. Claire had never told me she was pregnant. Not once. After the divorce, we stopped speaking completely, and somewhere inside all that anger and distance, an entire life had existed without me even knowing. I dropped down to one knee because suddenly my legs didn't feel steady anymore. "How old are you girls?" I asked. 5, they answered together, and that single word destroyed me more than anything else that day. 5 years. 5 years since I walked away from my marriage thinking I had only lost my wife. 5 years without knowing I had daughters. I looked at their faces again, really looked this time, and there was no escaping the truth anymore. Those little girls weren't just Claire's children, they were mine. For a long moment, none of us moved. Lily and Sophie just stood there watching me carefully, like they could sense I was trying not to fall apart in front of them. My mind kept searching for some explanation that would hurt less, but every answer only made the guilt heavier. Claire raised them alone, while I spent years chasing money, awards, and a version of success that suddenly felt hollow, standing there beside her grave. I looked down at the headstone again. Beloved mother. Brave heart. That was all it said. No wife, no husband, no sign I had ever existed in her life at all. And honestly, maybe I didn't deserve to. But standing there, looking at those 2 little girls with my eyes and her smile, another feeling slowly started creeping in beneath the guilt. Fear. Because for the first time in years, I realized I still had something left to lose. The hardest part wasn't finding out they were mine. It was realizing, within the next few minutes, that these 2 little girls had been standing beside their mother's grave with no one truly waiting for them at home. I looked at them and tried to breathe normally, but my mind kept spinning. What had Claire told them about me? Did they know I was their father? Did they think I had left because I never wanted them? I cleared my throat. because my voice felt trapped somewhere in my chest. "What are your names?" I asked gently. The girl holding the flowers looked at me first. "I'm Lily," she said. "And that's my sister, Sophie." I nodded, repeating their names silently like I was afraid I might lose them if I didn't hold on tight enough. "Lily and Sophie," I said softly. "Those are beautiful names." Sophie looked down at the folded paper in her hands. "Mommy chose them." There was something about the way she said "mommy" that made me feel smaller than I had ever felt in my life. I nodded toward the paper, careful not to sound like I was prying. "Is that for her?" Sophie held it closer to her chest. "It's a letter. We wrote it for Mommy." I didn't know what to say to that. I had spent years speaking in boardrooms, closing deals, handling people twice my age, but standing in front of two 5-year-old girls with a letter to their mother, I felt completely useless. "Would it be okay if I sat with you for a little while?" I asked. The girls looked at each other, then gave the smallest shrug. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was enough. I sat down on the low concrete edge around Claire's grave, keeping a little distance so they wouldn't feel crowded. For a moment, none of us said anything. The quiet did not feel peaceful. It felt like it was holding too many things at once. Finally, I said, "I knew your mom a long time ago." Lily turned her head. "Were you her friend?" I looked at Claire's name on the stone before answering, because somehow saying it to the girls felt heavier than saying it to myself. "I was more than her friend once. We were married." Both girls looked at me at the same time. Sophie's eyes widened. "You were Mommy's husband?" I nodded slowly. "Yes. A long time ago, before you were born." They stayed quiet, and I could see them trying to place me somewhere inside the small world they understood. Then Lily asked the question I knew I deserved, even though it still hit me hard. "Then why weren't you with her?" There was no anger in her voice. That almost made it worse. It was just a child asking the one thing that did not make sense. I looked at my hands and tried to find an answer that was honest without putting grown-up pain on two little shoulders. "Because I made mistakes," I said quietly. "Your mom and I were hurt, and I walked away when I should have stayed and listened. I didn't know about you two. If I had known..." My throat tightened, and I had to stop for a second. I would have done things differently. Lily didn't answer. Sophie stared at the ground, rubbing the corner of the letter with her thumb. Then she said in a voice so soft I almost missed it, "We don't have anyone else now." I looked up fast. "What do you mean?" She glanced at Lily first, like she needed permission to say more. Then she whispered, "Mommy got sick. She tried to be okay for us, but she was tired all the time." Lily swallowed hard. "After Mommy went away, we stayed with Mrs. Harper next door, but she said she can't keep us much longer." Something inside me went cold. This was no longer just about my regret. These were two little girls standing at the edge of being passed from one uncertain place to another. "Where is Mrs. Harper now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "She dropped us off," Lily said. "She said she would come back later." I looked around the cemetery then, really looked. No woman near the gate, no car waiting by the curb, no adult sitting under the trees. Just rows of headstones, hot air, and two children who had been left alone too long. The anger came first, but fear followed right behind it. I stood up slowly and pulled out my phone. "Do you know her number?" Both girls shook their heads. I crouched back down so I wasn't towering over them. "Okay," I said carefully. "Then here's what we'll do. You can come with me for a little while, just until we find Mrs. Harper and figure out what's going on. I won't take you anywhere without telling you first. And if anything feels wrong, you can say so. All right?" They looked at each other again. Sophie nodded first. Lily waited one more second, then nodded too. "Okay." I held out both hands, and when their small fingers slipped into mine, I felt something in me tighten in a way I did not know how to explain. It was trust, but it was too easy, too innocent, and that scared me more than anything. As we walked back to my car, I turned once and looked at Claire's grave. I wanted to ask her why she had never told me, why no one had called, why my daughters had been grieving her without me. But the questions had to wait, because the truth in front of me was bigger than the past behind me. Whatever happened next, I was not leaving Lily and Sophie behind. Not this time. Inside the car, I buckled them into the back seat myself and checked twice, maybe 3 times, because doing one small thing right suddenly felt important. They sat quietly, looking out opposite windows, their faces too serious for children who should have been arguing over snacks or cartoons. I watched them in the rearview mirror as I pulled away from the cemetery, and for the first time in years, my life didn't feel controlled, planned, or safe. I had no answers, no plan. Just 2 little girls in the back seat, a dead woman I owed more than an apology to, and the sickening feeling that the part of my life I thought was over had only just begun. I could have kept driving in circles, pretending I needed more time to think, but the truth was right there in my back seat. 2 little girls had just lost their mother, and whether I was ready or not, they needed something from me before they needed answers. They needed food. So I pulled into a small diner a few miles from the cemetery, the kind of place with faded red booths, sticky menus, and a bell over the door that rang too loudly when we walked in. I kept one hand close behind Lily and Sophie as they stepped inside, not touching them too much, just staying near enough in case they needed me. It was strange how fast that feeling came over me, that need to protect them, even though a few hours earlier I had not known they existed. The waitress looked from my suit to the girls and then back at me, clearly wondering what story had walked into her diner, but she only gave us a tired smile and led us to a corner booth. I ordered grilled cheese sandwiches for the girls, apple juice, and coffee for myself. When the food came, they waited until I nodded before they touched it, and that small little habit hurt me more than I expected. They were polite in a way children usually become when life has taught them not to ask for too much. Then hunger won, and they started eating quietly, taking small bites at first, then faster. I watched them across the table and felt every missing year press against me. First steps I never saw, first words I never heard, birthday candles I never helped them blow out, tiny fevers, school drawings, bedtime stories, all of it had happened somewhere without me. And the worst part was, I had been alive the whole time, sitting in meetings, chasing deals, telling myself I was building a life. I wasn't angry at Lily or Sophie. I wasn't even sure I was angry at Claire. The anger that came up in me was sharper than that, because it had nowhere to go except back into myself. How had I never wondered if Claire needed help? How had I accepted the silence so easily, just because it was easier than facing what we had broken? When the girls finished eating, I folded my hands on the table and tried to keep my voice gentle. "Can I ask you something?" They both nodded, wiping their fingers carefully with napkins. "Did your mom ever talk about me?" Lily looked unsure, but Sophie answered first. "She had a picture of you in her drawer," she said. "Sometimes she looked at it and smiled. Sometimes she got sad." I felt that one sentence hit me harder than any accusation could have. "Did she ever tell you who I was?" Sophie looked down at her empty cup. "She said your name once." Then Lily added quietly, "She said you used to be her favorite person." Sophie nodded. "She said you were gone, but you weren't bad." I sat back against the booth, and for a moment I could not speak. Claire had every reason to turn me into the villain of their childhood, but she hadn't. She had left a small, careful space for me in their lives, even when I had left no space for her in mine. That kind of mercy almost hurt worse than hate. I blinked hard because my eyes were starting to burn, and I could not let myself fall apart in front of them. Not yet. I paid the bill and walked them back to the car. This time, they climbed in a little easier. Lily even hummed under her breath while she buckled herself in, a soft, broken little tune that made the car feel less empty and more terrifying at the same time. I sat behind the wheel for a few seconds before starting the engine. I needed answers, and there was only one person who might have them. Mrs. Harper. The neighborhood where Claire had been living sat on the edge of town, past a row of gas stations and old houses with cracked sidewalks and fences leaning tiredly toward the street. I slowed down when the girls pointed to a small one-story house with faded paint and flower pots by the steps. It was clean, but worn down in the way places get when people are doing their best with too little. I parked out front and turned to the girls. "This is where you stayed with Mrs. Harper?" They nodded. I walked them up to the porch and knocked. For a while, nothing happened. Then the door opened, and an older woman with gray hair pulled back tightly stared at me like she had seen a ghost. "Mr. Carter?" she said, almost under her breath. "I never thought you'd come." My stomach tightened. "You know who I am?" Her eyes moved to the girls, then back to me. "Of course I do. You need to come inside." The house smelled faintly of laundry, soap, and soup. It was modest, neat, and tired around the edges. A few toys were stacked beside the couch, and children's drawings were pinned to the refrigerator with cheap magnets. Lily and Sophie went straight to the couch like they knew exactly where to sit. I stayed standing because I didn't trust myself to sit down yet. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" I asked, trying not to let my voice rise. Mrs. Harper let out a long breath. "Claire didn't want to drag you back into something you had already walked away from." "They're my daughters," I said, and my voice cracked on the word. "I should have known." "I know," she said softly, and I think she knew that too. But Claire was proud, and tired, and scared. She kept saying you had another life now. I looked toward the girls, then back at her. Why didn't she reach out before it got this far? Mrs. Harper's face changed then, like she had been carrying one last thing and knew it was time to hand it over. "She did," she said quietly. "Not the way she should have, maybe. But before she passed, she wrote you a letter." My heart seemed to stop for a second. "A letter?" Mrs. Harper nodded and walked into the next room. When she came back, she was holding a sealed envelope, slightly bent at the corners, with my name written across the front in Claire's handwriting. And the second I saw it, I knew whatever was inside that envelope was going to change everything again. The envelope felt too light for something that carried 5 lost years inside it. I knew Claire's handwriting immediately, small and careful, slightly leaning to the right, and just seeing my name written by her hand made my chest tighten. For a few seconds I only stared at it. Mrs. Harper stayed quiet near the doorway, giving me space like she already knew opening that letter was going to hurt. Then she said softly, "Claire loved those girls more than anything. She tried her best, but near the end, she knew they'd need more than I could give them. They need someone who belongs to them. They need you." I finally opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper dated only a few weeks before Claire passed. At first, the words blurred because my eyes wouldn't focus. Then I forced myself to keep reading. Claire wrote that she found out she was pregnant after the divorce was already over. She said she almost called me so many times, typed messages she never sent, even drove past places where she thought she might see me, then lost the nerve and turned around. She wrote that at first she was angry, then proud, then scared, and after enough time passed, the silence between us became too heavy to break anymore. She wrote about Lily and Sophie like they were the only thing keeping her going. Lily was stubborn, the kind of little girl who folded her arms when life stopped making sense. Sophie was gentler, but braver than most people realized. Claire said they both had my eyes, my temper when exhausted, and my habit of looking away whenever I was trying not to cry. That line nearly destroyed me. Then I reached the last sentence. "If you ever find them, please love them. Even if you can't forgive me." My hands shook as I folded the letter again. Across the room, Lily and Sophie were asleep together under a thin blanket on Mrs. Harper's couch, curled close like they were trying to hold on to the only family they had left. I looked at them, then at Mrs. Harper. "I want to take care of them," I said quietly. "Not just for now. I mean really take care of them. If they'll let me." Mrs. Harper's eyes filled immediately, but she nodded like she'd been waiting to hear those words all along. "I hoped you would say that. I knew none of this would be simple. There would be paperwork, lawyers, questions, and 2 little girls who didn't owe me trust just because we shared blood. But standing there with Claire's letter in my hand and my daughters sleeping only a few feet away, one thing became painfully clear. I had already missed 5 years of their lives. I wasn't losing the rest too. The next morning, I woke up in Mrs. Harper's guest room on a narrow mattress that squeaked every time I moved. For a few seconds, I forgot where I was. Then I heard birds outside, dishes clinking softly in the kitchen, little footsteps somewhere down the hallway, and everything came rushing back at once. Claire, the cemetery, the letter, Lily and Sophie, my daughters. My suit jacket hung wrinkled over an old wooden chair, looking completely useless in that tiny house where money and status suddenly meant nothing. I sat on the edge of the bed trying to slow my thoughts down. Yesterday, I thought I needed answers. This morning, I realized answers were only the beginning. I couldn't just walk into their lives and expect them to trust me because I finally showed up. They had lost their mother. Their whole world had collapsed, and to them, I was still basically a stranger wearing a familiar face. Trust wasn't going to come from one emotional speech. It would come from little things repeated over and over. Breakfast, school mornings, listening, staying, being there when things got difficult instead of disappearing again. When I walked into the kitchen, Mrs. Harper was already making pancakes. The smell of butter filled the room, warm and ordinary in a way that almost hurt. She glanced at me and gave a tired little nod. "The girls are still asleep," she said. "They didn't talk much last night. I think they're still trying to process everything." "I don't blame them," I said, rubbing my face. "I'm still trying to process it myself." Mrs. Harper slid pancakes onto a plate and turned off the stove. "They're strong girls, but don't mistake quiet for okay. They've lived around fear and loss longer than children should." I nodded slowly. "I know they won't trust me right away." Then I looked toward the hallway. "I just want a chance to prove I'm not leaving again." Mrs. Harper studied me for a moment, like she was deciding whether those words deserved belief. Then she poured coffee into 2 old mismatched mugs and sat across from me. I stared down at my cup, thinking about how strange life was. I had money, houses, assistants, every expensive thing people spend years chasing, but none of it could help me with the one thing that actually mattered now. Learning how to be a father after missing the years that mattered most. A little later, soft voices drifted from the hallway. Lily and Sophie walked into the kitchen wearing pajamas, hair messy from sleep, both still looking unsure around me. Sophie held a small, stuffed bear against her chest, while Lily carried Claire's letter carefully in both hands, like it might fall apart if she held it wrong. I stood automatically, then stopped myself before stepping closer. I didn't want to overwhelm them. "Morning," I said gently. Both girls nodded, but stayed quiet. Mrs. Harper pulled out chairs and rescued the moment before the silence became uncomfortable. "Come, eat before the pancakes get cold." The girls climbed into their seats beside her, close enough to feel safe, still careful about me. I sat across from them, trying to look calmer than I felt while they ate slowly and kept sneaking little glances at me between bites, like they were still trying to figure out what kind of man had suddenly walked into their lives. And honestly, I was wondering the exact same thing. After breakfast, Mrs. Harper quietly pulled me aside while Lily and Sophie were still poking at the last pieces of pancake on their plates. "If you really want those girls in your life, Mr. Carter, you need a lawyer," she said softly. "Until the paperwork changes, I'm still legally responsible for them." I nodded immediately. "I'll handle it today. I want to do this right, Mrs." Harper studied me for a second, then said the one thing that stayed in my head all day. "Then start proving it to the girls first. They need to know you're not another adult who says nice things and disappears." So I didn't go back to the city. I canceled every meeting on my calendar, ignored my office completely, and stayed in town. By lunchtime, I'd rented a small hotel suite with 2 bedrooms and a kitchen, nothing fancy. I just wanted somewhere the girls could feel safe without feeling like strangers. That afternoon, I asked Lily and Sophie if they wanted to spend a little time with me. No pressure, maybe snacks, maybe a movie, maybe nothing at all. Both girls looked at Mrs. Harper before answering. She gently reminded them they could leave anytime they wanted. Sophie nodded first. Lily took longer, but eventually nodded too. The drive to the hotel was quiet. They sat in the back seat, staring out the windows while I tried not to grip the steering wheel too tightly. When we got upstairs, I showed them where the snacks were, handed them the TV remote, and let them choose the movie themselves. I didn't push conversation. I didn't try to act like we were suddenly some perfect family. I just stayed there with them. Halfway through the movie, Sophie slowly leaned against my arm like she'd already decided I was safe. The feeling hit me so hard, I almost forgot how to breathe. I stayed completely still for a second, scared I'd ruin it if I moved too fast. Across the room, Lily sat curled up in a chair, pretending not to watch us. But later, when a cartoon character crashed into a wall, she laughed before catching herself. It was tiny, barely a sound, but I held on to that moment harder than any business deal I'd ever closed. That evening, while I drove them back, Sophie surprised me again. "Can we come tomorrow too?" she asked quietly from the back seat. I smiled before I could stop myself. Yeah, sweetheart. Anytime you want. At Mrs. Harper's front door, Lily suddenly stopped walking. She looked up at me with those careful eyes that always seemed older than 5 years old. Are you going to leave again? The question hurt because she asked it like she already knew people did that. I crouched down in front of her. No, I said firmly. I'm here now, and I'm not leaving you two again. She didn't smile, didn't hug me. She just gave one small nod before going inside. But honestly, that tiny nod felt bigger than anything else that had happened all day. It wasn't trust yet, but it was the first crack in the wall she'd built around herself. The next few days slowly turned into a routine none of us expected. My mornings used to start with stock reports and conference calls. Now they started with tangled hair, spilled cereal, and Sophie asking me the same random questions every 5 minutes. The hotel suite slowly stopped feeling temporary. It started feeling like a place where broken people were trying to learn each other again. Every morning I picked the girls up from Mrs. Harper's. Every evening I brought them back. At first they stayed with me for an hour or two, then longer. Soon we were spending almost the whole day together. We watched movies, walked through the park, ate ice cream on Main Street, and filled the hotel table with crayons, paper animals, and sticky candy wrappers. One afternoon I noticed Lily curling her toes inside her sneakers because the shoes were too small. She never complained once. So I took both girls shopping. Sophie grabbed the brightest sweater she could find. Lily picked plain sneakers and looked nervous when I carried them to the register, like she expected me to put them back. That look alone nearly broke my heart. I never asked the girls to hug me. I didn't want affection to feel forced. But Sophie started doing it on her own, quick little hugs at first, then longer ones every day after that. Lily stayed more careful. She watched everything quietly, always keeping one eye on Sophie like protecting her had become her job. So I gave her space. I asked instead of demanded. I let her come closer on her own terms. Then one afternoon, while we were painting outside on the hotel balcony, Lily pushed her paper toward me without looking up. "Can you help me draw a cat?" she asked softly. It was such a small thing. But to me, it felt like hearing a locked door finally click open. And while those tiny moments were slowly bringing us together, the harder part had already started behind the scenes. My lawyers had begun the custody process, and deep down, I knew loving those girls might not be enough. Soon, I would have to prove I deserved them too. I called the best lawyer I knew the morning after the custody papers were filed and told him I wanted everything done clean. No shortcuts, no pressure, no using money to force my way into those girls' lives. I didn't want Lily and Sophie growing up hearing that I bought my second chance. I wanted to earn it. Mrs. Harper helped more than I expected. She gave my lawyer copies of school papers, medical records, little details about the girls' routines, things only someone who truly cared would remember. She never tried to make things harder for me. If anything, she quietly helped hold the pieces together while I learned how to step into a life I should have been part of from the start. But not everyone was happy I came back. One afternoon, I got a phone call from Claire's older sister, Vanessa. She didn't even bother hiding how angry she was. She said I had no right to suddenly appear acting like a father after missing 5 years of their lives. She reminded me about the nights Claire cried herself to sleep, about hospital visits, overdue bills, fear, exhaustion, all the things I hadn't been there for. "You don't get to play hero now," she snapped. I let her talk. Honestly, she had earned the right to hate me if she wanted to. I didn't interrupt once. When she finally stopped, breathing hard into the phone, she asked the question I already knew was coming. "Why do you think you deserve those girls now?" I looked across the hotel room at Lily and Sophie sitting on the floor, building a crooked tower out of blocks, and for a second my chest hurt so badly I could barely answer. "Because they're my daughters," I said quietly. "Because I already failed them once without even knowing it. And because I'm not walking away again." The line stayed silent for a few seconds. Then Vanessa sighed, tired more than angry now. "Then don't hurt them," she whispered. That night, I drove the girls out to a hill just outside town where the stars looked brighter without the city lights. I brought blankets, snacks, and an old constellation book I found at a gas station on the way there. We lay on our backs pointing at random stars and turning them into ridiculous shapes. Sophie swore one cluster looked like a dinosaur. Lily said it looked more like a burned chicken nugget. It was the first time I heard her laugh without catching herself afterward. As the air got colder, Sophie curled against my side under the blanket. Then she looked up at the sky and asked quietly, "Do you think Mommy can still see us?" The question hit me so fast I had to look away for a second before answering. "Yeah," I said softly. "I think she sees you all the time." Sophie was quiet for a moment. "Do you think she's proud of us?" "I know she is." Then Lily turned toward me. "Would she be proud of you too?" That one hurt more because I didn't know the answer. I stared up at the stars for a long moment before speaking. "I hope someday she would be," I admitted. "I'm trying really hard to become someone she'd recognize again." Neither girl replied after that, but the silence didn't feel awkward. It felt warm somehow, honest. And lying there between my daughters under an open sky, I realized none of the things I spent years chasing had ever felt this real. This mattered more than the buildings, the money, the meetings, all of it. I couldn't change the past. But maybe I could still stop the future from breaking too. The next week passed quietly on the surface, but underneath everything, pressure was building. The routine stayed the same. Morning pickups from Mrs. Harper's house, afternoons filled with coloring books, cartoons, snacks, and tiny moments that somehow meant everything. But now there were lawyers, phone calls, interviews, paperwork, people deciding whether I deserved to keep my daughters. Then one afternoon, there was a knock on the hotel door. A woman in a gray blazer stood outside holding a clipboard. "Mr. Carter?" "I'm Olivia Bennett from Family Services." I felt my stomach tighten immediately. I invited her in while trying not to look nervous. Lily and Sophie were sitting on the floor stacking blocks into uneven little towers. Olivia watched them quietly for several minutes, writing notes now and then, before asking if she could speak to me privately. We stepped onto the small balcony outside the room. The questions came exactly the way I feared they would. Why hadn't I been involved before? Why wasn't my name on the birth certificates? What made me think I could suddenly provide emotional stability after years of absence? And what would I do if the court refused custody? Every question felt like someone pressing on a bruise. But this time, I didn't run from it. I told her the truth. That I didn't know Claire was pregnant. That I had buried myself in work after the divorce because it was easier than dealing with pain. That none of those excuses mattered now because two little girls needed me, whether I deserved the title of father or not. Olivia listened without showing much emotion. Not cruel, not warm, just careful, professional. Afterward, she knelt beside the girls and asked if they felt safe with me. Sophie nodded immediately. Lily hesitated for a second, then nodded too. Then Lily quietly added, "He makes pancakes with chocolate chips now." Olivia smiled a little while, writing something down on her clipboard. And weirdly, after she left, I felt relief more than fear. Not because I thought everything was solved, but because for once in my life, when something difficult stood in front of me, I stayed. For the first time in days, I had started to believe we were moving forward. Not safely, not easily, but forward. Then one afternoon, while Lily and Sophie were napping in the hotel bedroom, a plain envelope slid under my door and reminded me how quickly peace can disappear. There was no return address, only my name, written in a handwriting I didn't know. Inside was a formal notice. Ethan Reed, Claire's former boyfriend, had filed a motion asking the court to give him custody of Lily and Sophie. For a moment, I just sat there with the paper in my hands, reading the same lines again and again, hoping I had misunderstood. I remembered Ethan, but barely. He had come into Claire's life after our divorce, one of those people I dismissed because I was too busy pretending I had moved on. Back then, he was just a face at the edge of her story. Now he was trying to step into the center of my daughter's lives. When I called Mrs. Harper, she was just as stunned. "Ethan?" she said, almost sharply. He was hardly around when Claire was sick. He never acted like those girls were his responsibility. Why would he want them now? I didn't have an answer, but the question sat in my chest like a warning. Maybe he believed he was doing the right thing. Maybe he wanted control. Maybe he saw Claire's daughters as the last piece of her life he could still hold on to. Whatever his reason was, one thing became clear. This was no longer only about proving I could be a father. Now I had to protect Lily and Sophie from being pulled into the hands of someone who might not love them the way they needed. I called my lawyer right away. He told me our case was strong, but there would have to be a hearing. Statements, records, questions. The kind of questions adults ask while children pay the price. I didn't tell the girls about the letter, but somehow they felt the air change. Lily started biting her nails again. Sophie stopped asking for bedtime stories and began falling asleep with her stuffed bear pressed tight under her chin. They didn't understand the legal words, but children always understand when the adults around them are afraid. One night, as I tucked them into bed, Lily looked up at me and asked, "Are we leaving soon?" I felt that question hit deeper than I expected. I sat beside her and pulled the blanket up over her shoulders. "Why would you think that?" She stared at the ceiling and whispered, "Because good things don't stay." I had to close my eyes for a second before answering. "This is going to stay," I told her. "I can't promise it won't get hard, but I can promise I'm not leaving. Not because of papers, not because of people, not because I get scared." Lily didn't say anything, but she moved just a little closer to me, and that was enough. Later, after both girls were asleep, I sat alone in the hotel living room with the lights off, watching the city glow through the window. I made a promise there, not out loud, but deep enough that I felt it in my bones. I would fight for them. Not for pride. Not to fix my image. Not to erase what I missed. I would fight because two little girls had already lost too much, and I refused to become one more person who failed them. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Beige walls, old wooden benches, a clock that seemed louder than it should have been. Lily and Sophie weren't there. Mrs. Harper stayed with them because everyone agreed the hearing would be too much for them. But even without them in the room, I felt them with me in every breath. I had promised I would not leave, and now that promise was being tested in front of strangers. Across the room sat Ethan Reed in a gray suit, looking polished but not comfortable. I studied him quietly, trying to connect the man in front of me to the few memories I had of him years ago. I remembered how he used to hover around Claire after our divorce, always close enough to seem helpful, never close enough for me to understand what he really wanted. His lawyer presented him as a steady adult figure, someone who had been present during Claire's final months, someone who had offered financial help and occasional care. Technically, some of it was true, but it was the kind of truth that leaves out the parts that matter most. It did not say who held Sophie when she woke up crying. It did not say who knew Lily hated sleeping with the closet door open. It did not say who had stayed, day after day, when the girls were scared to trust anyone. And as I sat there listening to a version of their lives being reduced to paperwork, I realized the fight had only just begun. My lawyer had come prepared, but even then, sitting in that courtroom felt like having my whole life placed on a table for strangers to judge. She presented the DNA results, the reports from Olivia Bennett, Mrs. Harper's statement, and every record showing what had happened since I found Lily and Sophie at Claire's grave. Then she showed something I was not ready for. 2 drawings the girls had made without anyone asking. Both were simple, messy, crayon pictures of a man standing beside 2 little girls, with a house behind them and a heart floating over the roof. I couldn't look at the judge when those drawings were described out loud. I just stared at my hands and tried to keep myself together. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up with my heart beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't read from a paper. I didn't want a perfect speech. I told the judge the truth. I told her I didn't know Claire was pregnant. I told her I came back to the cemetery thinking I was only saying goodbye to a woman I had failed, and instead I found 2 little girls with my eyes, standing there in red sweaters, carrying more pain than children should ever carry. Then I told her what I had learned since that day. Lily didn't like raisins and cookies. Sophie talked in her sleep when she was scared. Both girls fed ducks tiny pieces of bread because they were worried big pieces might hurt them. They danced when they thought nobody was watching. They still missed their mother every single day. And somehow, after everything, they had still given me a chance to show up. I admitted I had not been there when I should have been. I admitted I would carry that for the rest of my life. But I was there now. I was not leaving again. When I sat down, the room went quiet. Even Ethan looked different, like some of the fight had gone out of him. The judge called a short break, and I stepped outside because I needed air. I sat on a cold bench under a gray sky, trying to imagine how I would face Lily and Sophie if the answer was no. How do you tell 2 children that the home they had just started to believe in might be taken away? An hour later, we were called back inside. The judge spoke slowly. She acknowledged Ethan's claim. She acknowledged the small ways he had been present near the end of Claire's life. But then she said something I will never forget. Children do not feel safe because an adult was nearby on paper. They feel safe because someone keeps showing up when it matters. And then she granted me full legal custody of Lily and Sophie, effective immediately. For a second, I couldn't move. My lawyer touched my arm lightly, and only then did the words begin to settle inside me. They were coming home with me. Not for a visit, not for a few days. Home. I didn't break down in the courtroom. I waited until I reached the hallway, until the door closed behind me, and then I leaned against the wall and finally let the relief hit. That evening, when I walked into Mrs. Harper's house, Lily and Sophie looked at my face and somehow knew before I said anything. Lily ran first. She wrapped her arms around me so tightly it knocked the breath out of my chest. Sophie came right after her, pressing her cheek against my jacket. Then she whispered, "Can we go home now?" I knelt in front of them, kissed both their foreheads, and said, "Yes, let's go home." I knew it would not be easy. There would still be nights when they missed Claire so badly no words could fix it. There would be questions, anger, grief, and days when I would not know what to do. But we had been given a beginning, and this time I was going to stay for every hard part of it. The first morning in our new home felt almost unreal. Sunlight came through the kitchen windows and spilled across the wooden floor. The girls' room still smelled like fresh paint, soft colors they had picked themselves. Sophie came into the kitchen wearing her favorite red sweater, even though the day was warm, and Lily followed with a book tucked under one arm. I stood at the stove making pancakes, trying to remember who wanted syrup and who wanted fruit, trying not to burn the edges. It was messy, ordinary, and nothing like the life I used to chase. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't want to be anywhere else. This was not a visit anymore. This was home. Our home. The court made it official, but honestly, the real change had already happened long before the paperwork was signed. Somewhere between bedtime stories, grocery store trips, burned pancakes, and quiet hugs in the hallway, the three of us had stopped feeling like strangers trying to survive the same tragedy. We had started feeling like a family. Not a perfect one, just a real one. I bought a house a few weeks later in a quiet neighborhood close to Mrs. Harper's place. Not because it was expensive, not because it looked impressive. For the first time in my life, I picked a home for reasons that had nothing to do with status. I chose it because the backyard was safe, because the kitchen got warm morning sunlight, and because I could picture Lily and Sophie growing up there without feeling afraid all the time. The first breakfasts in that house were chaos. Syrup everywhere, Sophie dropping blueberries under the table on purpose just to watch me crawl around looking for them. Lily, sitting at the counter reading from whatever book she was obsessed with that week while pretending not to notice I was listening to every single word. The house was loud and messy and alive, and somehow it healed something in me that years of success never touched. I used to think happiness came after achievement, after money, after finally reaching whatever impossible standard I had built for myself. But it turned out happiness looked a lot smaller and softer than that. It looked like crooked pigtails before school. Tiny notes folded into lunchboxes, little voices yelling, "Daddy," from the other room, like they never doubted I'd answer. The weeks slowly settled into routines that felt ordinary in the best possible way. Mornings were rushed and clumsy. Someone was always missing a sock. Someone always wanted a different cereal after I already poured the first one. Afternoons meant walks to the park, glitter stuck permanently in the carpet from craft projects, and Sophie asking questions so random they made Lily groan dramatically from the back seat. Nights were quieter. Baths, storybooks, soft conversations in dark bedrooms after nightmares neither girl fully knew how to explain yet. I started writing again during those nights. Not business plans, not speeches, just thoughts. Small moments I didn't want to forget, the way Sophie got emotional over injured butterflies, the way Lily asked huge questions about stars and grief in the same calm voice, the way both girls said good night like it actually mattered. Somewhere in all of that, I realized being a parent wasn't about always knowing what to do. It was choosing to stay even when you didn't. Mrs. Harper stayed part of our lives too. The girls still ran to hug her every time she visited, and honestly, so did I in my own way. There were days I still felt overwhelmed. Days when Sophie woke up crying from dreams she couldn't explain. Days when Lily got quiet for hours because she missed Claire too much to talk about it. Mrs. Harper would remind me gently that healing wasn't something you could rush. Love isn't fixing every problem, she told me once, while helping Sophie bake cookies. It's staying long enough that they stop feeling alone inside them. One afternoon, I found Lily sitting alone in the backyard, staring out at nothing. I sat beside her without speaking. After a while, she looked at me and asked quietly, "Do you think Mommy would have liked this house?" I took her hand. "Yeah," I said. "I think she would have loved seeing you girls here." Lily leaned against my arm after that and stayed there quietly while the wind moved through the trees above us. And somehow those silent moments ended up meaning more than all the big emotional speeches people imagine families are supposed to have. By the end of that first month, something inside all three of us had changed. Claire was still part of this home. Her photos stayed on the shelves. The girls talked about her constantly. Sometimes Sophie laughed exactly like her. Sometimes Lily gave me the same look Claire used to when she thought I was being stubborn. I never tried replacing her. That was never possible. But slowly, without even noticing it happen, I became something else to the girls. I became the person they looked for when they were scared. The person they ran to when something good happened. The person who stayed. And honestly, that changed me more than anything else ever had. I spent years chasing bigger offices, bigger deals, bigger versions of success, thinking achievement would finally make me feel complete. But in the end, the thing that saved me wasn't success. It was two little girls in red sweaters calling me dad for the very first time. If there's one thing the story taught me, it's that love alone doesn't magically erase pain. The past still matters. Loss still hurts. Some scars stay forever. But people can still choose each other after heartbreak. Families can still be rebuilt slowly, awkwardly, imperfectly. And sometimes, the most important thing a person can do is simply stay when life finally gives them another chance. If this story touched your heart even a little, I'd really love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy emotional stories about family, healing, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe and stay with us for more. This story is inspired by emotional situations that can happen in real life. Characters and scenes are creatively adapted for storytelling purposes, and some visuals or voices may be created using AI technology to enhance the viewing experience.